At the heart of Manhattan's bustling financial district stood the prestigious Blue Harbor Cafe, where the city's elite gathered each morning for their daily dose of perfectly crafted coffee. Among them was Richard Thompson, a man whose net worth exceeded $8 billion, yet whose understanding of human dignity seemed inversely proportional to his wealth. On this particular autumn morning, as golden leaves danced outside the cafe's towering windows, a new waitress named Joy Williams was starting her first day. At 32, Joy was working 3 jobs to put herself through nursing school, driven by an unwavering dream to make a difference in her community's healthcare system. The morning rush was in full swing when Richard Thompson made his usual dramatic entrance. Designer suit perfectly pressed, Italian leather shoes gleaming, he carried himself with the air of someone who believed the world existed solely for his convenience. The regular staff tensed, knowing his reputation for being particularly demanding. Joy approached his table with a warm smile, unaware of what was to come. "Good morning, sir. Welcome to Blue Harbor. May I take your order?" Thompson barely glanced up from his phone, rattling off his usual complex order: double-shot espresso, exactly 165 degrees, with precisely 3/4 of an inch of foam, and don't even think about using anything but Brazilian Santos beans. Joy diligently noted every detail, determined to provide excellent service. When she returned with his meticulously prepared coffee, Thompson took one sip and his face contorted with disgust. What happened next would be captured by dozens of phone cameras and would soon spiral into a social media firestorm. "This is absolutely unacceptable," he thundered, standing up so abruptly his chair scraped against the floor. "How dare you serve me this swill? Do you have any idea who I am?" His voice rose with each word, drawing the attention of everyone in the cafe. "I don't know where they found you, but clearly, they're scraping the bottom of the barrel now." Joy stood her ground, maintaining her composure even as Thompson continued his tirade. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady as she offered to remake his drink. However, Thompson wasn't finished. He reached for the coffee cup, and in what he would later claim was an accident, tilted it just enough to let the hot liquid spill across the counter, dripping onto Joy's uniform. The cafe fell silent. Phones continued recording. Joy's eyes welled with tears, not from the heat of the coffee, but from the humiliation. Yet she held her head high, reaching for napkins to clean the mess while maintaining her dignity. What Thompson didn't realize was that among the stunned onlookers was Chen Wei, a tech journalist for a prominent digital news platform. Wei had been quietly working on an exposé about toxic corporate culture, and this incident would become its catalyst. As Thompson stormed out of the cafe, Wei approached Joy, not for an interview, but as a human being concerned for another. "Are you all right?" Wei asked, helping her clean up the mess. "What just happened here? It wasn't right. Would you be willing to share your story?" Joy hesitated, knowing she needed this job. But looking around at the supportive faces of other customers, something shifted in her perspective. Her voice steady, she made a decision that would set in motion a chain of events none of them could have anticipated. "Yes," she said quietly. "I think it's time someone spoke up." What Joy didn't know was that her simple act of courage would not only challenge Thompson's empire but would also inspire a movement that would force the business world to confront its deeply rooted prejudices. As Wei left the cafe with his notes and video evidence, the first dominoes of Thompson's carefully constructed public image began to fall. The story was about to explode across social media platforms, but this was just the beginning. Thompson's actions that morning would return to haunt him in ways he never imagined, and Joy's dignity in the face of humiliation would resonate with millions. The real question was, how far would the ripples of this single incident reach, and who else would be caught in their wake? By nightfall, the video of Thompson's outburst had gone viral. Chen Wei's initial social media post, featuring a carefully edited clip that protected Joy's privacy while highlighting Thompson's behavior, had already garnered over 2 million views. The hashtag #BoycottThompsonEnterprises was trending nationwide, and the court of public opinion had begun its deliberation. In his penthouse office overlooking Central Park, Thompson sat surrounded by his crisis management team, watching his carefully curated reputation crumble in real time. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing with calls from board members, business partners, and journalists seeking comments. "This will blow over," Thompson insisted, loosening his tie as he paced the room. "It always does. Just issue the standard apology template and move on." But his PR director, Angela Chen, no relation to the journalist, knew better. She'd spent years managing Thompson's public image, but this time was different. "Sir, this isn't going away," Angela stated firmly, sliding a tablet across the desk. "The witness accounts are overwhelming, and there's something else you need to see." She pulled up a series of documents that made Thompson's face pale. Chen Wei hadn't just posted a viral video, he'd begun publishing a comprehensive investigation into Thompson Enterprises' hiring practices, wage disparities, and discrimination complaints that had been quietly settled over the years. Meanwhile, across town in her modest apartment, Joy sat with her younger sister, reading through hundreds of messages of support flooding her social media accounts. What struck her most weren't the angry calls for justice but the stories other service workers began sharing, stories of similar experiences they'd faced in silence. "I never wanted this kind of attention," Joy confided in her sister, wrapping her hands around a cup of chamomile tea. "I just wanted to finish nursing school, to make a difference in my own way." Her phone buzzed with another notification, this time from a prominent civil rights attorney offering to represent her pro bono. Back at Thompson Enterprises, the situation was rapidly deteriorating. Major clients began distancing themselves from the company, and the board called an emergency meeting. Thompson's initial dismissal of the incident as trivial in a hastily posted tweet had only fueled the fire. The next morning, as Thompson prepared for damage control, he discovered his private parking spot occupied by journalists. Among them was Mrs. Rose Henderson, an 82-year-old retired teacher who'd invested her life savings in Thompson Enterprises years ago. She'd taken 3 buses to reach his office, determined to look him in the eye and ask why he'd betrayed the values his company claimed to represent. "My late husband and I believed in your vision," she told the gathered reporters, her voice wavering but determined. "We invested everything because you promised to build a company that cared about people." "What happened to that promise, Mr. Thompson?" The video of Mrs. Henderson's quiet dignity in contrast to Thompson's attempt to hurry past her went viral within hours. The hashtag Justice for Joy evolved into hashtag Hold Them Accountable, focusing not just on one incident but on the larger pattern of corporate behavior it represented. Chen Wei's investigation deepened, revealing that Joy's incident was just the tip of the iceberg. Former employees began coming forward, sharing stories of systematic discrimination and hostile work environments. Each new revelation chipped away at the foundation of Thompson's empire. Joy, despite her reluctance to be in the spotlight, found herself becoming a symbol of resilience. Her nursing school classmates created a crowdfunding campaign to help her focus on her studies without working 3 jobs. The campaign quickly exceeded its initial goal, with thousands of small donations pouring in from around the country. Thompson's board of directors convened another emergency session, this time without him. The company's stock had dropped 15% in 2 days, and major investors were demanding action. Angela Chen prepared 3 different crisis management strategies, but she knew they were just buying time. The real solution would require something Thompson had never done in his life: acknowledge his mistakes and make genuine amends. As the week drew to a close, Joy received an unexpected visitor at her apartment, Thompson's daughter, Catherine. Unlike her father, Catherine had spent years working quietly with non-profit organizations, often at odds with her father's business practices. She arrived not as an emissary of Thompson Enterprises, but as someone seeking to right a wrong. "My father's actions don't just hurt others," Catherine explained, sitting across from Joy. "They poison everything they touch, including our family. Something has to change, and maybe this is finally the wake-up call he needs. The conversation between these two women, from vastly different worlds but united in their desire for change, would set the stage for events that neither Thompson nor his crisis team could have anticipated. As Catherine left Joy's apartment, she made a decision that would shock both her father and the business world. The story was no longer just about a billionaire's moment of cruelty or a waitress's dignity in the face of humiliation. It had become a catalyst for a larger conversation about power, privilege, and the responsibility of wealth. And in the quiet moments between the viral videos and trending hashtags, both Joy and Thompson faced decisions that would define not just their own futures, but potentially reshape the relationship between corporate America and its workers. Little did Thompson know that his biggest challenge wouldn't come from the press, the public, or even his board of directors. It would come from within his own family, and it would force him to confront truths he'd spent a lifetime avoiding. Catherine Thompson's decision would shake her father's empire to its core. On a crisp Monday morning, she walked into Chen Wei's office with a leather portfolio containing decades of documented discriminatory practices at Thompson Enterprises. As the company's former director of internal affairs, she had access to information that even the board didn't know existed. "I've spent years trying to change things from the inside," Catherine explained to Chen, her hands steady as she handed over the documents. "But sometimes, you need to tear down walls to rebuild something better." The documentation revealed a pattern of systematic discrimination that went far beyond isolated incidents like Joy's experience. Meanwhile, Joy's story had struck a chord with unexpected allies. The prestigious Wellington Medical School, following the viral coverage, offered her a full scholarship to their nursing program. The dean, Dr. Patricia Reeves, had herself worked as a waitress 30 years ago to put herself through medical school. "Your dignity and resilience represent exactly what we look for in healthcare professionals," Dr. Reeves told Joy during a private meeting. "Someone who can maintain their compassion even in the face of cruelty will make an exceptional nurse." Thompson, unaware of his daughter's actions, was facing his own crisis of conscience. For the first time in his life, his wealth couldn't shield him from consequences. Major clients were pulling contracts, and his social circle was rapidly shrinking. Even his country club membership was under review, a small matter, perhaps, but one that struck at the heart of his carefully constructed world. The revelation came during a heated board meeting. As Thompson confidently prepared to dismiss the latest round of allegations, his trusted assistant walked in with breaking news: Catherine's documents had been made public. The boardroom fell silent as headlines flashed across their phones. Thompson's face turned ashen as he realized the source of the leak. "My own daughter," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The weight of decades of arrogance and dismissiveness suddenly pressed down on his shoulders. For the first time, he looked every bit his 65 years. But the story took an unexpected turn when Mrs. Rose Henderson, the elderly investor who had confronted Thompson earlier, began organizing other small shareholders. They formed a coalition, demanding not just Thompson's resignation, but a complete restructuring of the company's leadership to include diverse voices from all levels of the organization. "We're not interested in destroying the company," Mrs. Henderson announced at a shareholders' meeting. "We want to transform it into what it always claimed to be, a business that values every human being's dignity." The movement gained unexpected momentum when several longtime employees from Thompson's original startup days came forward. They revealed how the company's culture had shifted from its early idealistic days to its current state. Among them was Robert Washington, Thompson's former business partner who had left the company 15 years ago over ethical disagreements. "Richard wasn't always like this," Washington explained in a televised interview. "Success didn't corrupt him, he let his fear of losing control corrupt him. The more he gained, the more he feared losing it all, and that fear turned into contempt for those he saw as beneath him." Joy, meanwhile, had begun her nursing studies, turning down multiple offers for paid interviews and book deals. Her quiet dignity continued to speak louder than any media appearance could. She focused on her education while working with a non-profit organization helping other service industry workers pursue higher education. The situation reached a turning point when Catherine organized a meeting between her father and Joy, not in a corporate office or through lawyers, but in the same cafe where everything had started. Thompson initially refused, but a late-night conversation with his wife of 40 years changed his mind. "You've spent your life building walls of wealth around yourself," his wife told him. "But walls don't just keep others out, they keep you imprisoned. It's time to break them down." The meeting was set for early morning, before the cafe opened to the public. Joy arrived first, sitting at the same table where the incident had occurred. When Thompson walked in, he looked different, his usual commanding presence replaced by something more human, more vulnerable. "I've rehearsed this moment 100 times, Thompson began, his voice unusually quiet. "Prepared speeches, explanations, justifications. But sitting here now, I realize none of that matters. What matters is that I've spent so long looking down on people that I forgot how to look them in the eye as equals." Joy listened without interrupting, her calm presence more powerful than any words. The conversation that followed wasn't just about one incident or one apology, it was about acknowledging the systemic issues that had allowed such behavior to become normalized. As they talked, early morning light streamed through the cafe windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Outside, the city was waking up, unaware that in this quiet moment, something profound was shifting. The story wasn't ending, it was transforming into something neither of them could have anticipated. Catherine, watching from a distance, saw something in her father she hadn't seen since she was a child, a glimpse of the man who had once dreamed of building something meaningful, before the pursuit of wealth had hardened him. The real question now was whether this moment of humanity could translate into lasting change, not just for Thompson Enterprises, but for the larger conversation about power, privilege, and human dignity in corporate America. The morning after Thompson's meeting with Joy, the board of Thompson Enterprises convened for what would become a historic session. The atmosphere in the boardroom was tense as Thompson walked in, noticeably without his usual entourage of lawyers and PR specialists. Instead, he was accompanied by his daughter Catherine and, to everyone's surprise, Robert Washington, his former business partner. "Before we begin," Thompson addressed the room, his voice carrying an unfamiliar note of humility, "I want to share something with you all." He pressed a button, and the room's screens lit up with images from the company's early days, a small office above a deli, a team of young innovators working late into the night, celebrations of their first successful contracts. "We lost our way," he continued, gesturing to the images. "Or rather, I lost our way. I turned this company from a place of innovation and respect into a monument to my ego." The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unused to this version of their CEO. Meanwhile, across town, Joy was starting her first day of clinicals at City General Hospital. As she donned her nursing scrubs, her phone buzzed with news alerts about Thompson Enterprises. She had chosen to focus on her studies rather than follow the media storm, but today's headlines were impossible to ignore. Thompson announces revolutionary company restructuring. The announcement detailed a comprehensive plan that went far beyond typical corporate damage control. Thompson Enterprises would be reorganizing under a new model of shared leadership, with representation from all levels of the company. More significantly, they would be establishing a foundation dedicated to supporting service workers pursuing higher education, with an initial endowment of $100 million from Thompson's personal fortune. But the real story was unfolding in less public ways. The cafe where everything had started was becoming an unlikely hub for change. Its owner, Mrs. Lin, had transformed it into a meeting place for service industry workers to connect with educational and legal resources. The Blue Harbor Initiative, as it came to be known, was spreading to other establishments across the city. Catherine Thompson took on a new role as the foundation's director, working closely with Joy to structure programs that would address the real needs of working students. Their collaboration sparked conversations about privilege, opportunity, and the true meaning of corporate responsibility. "We're not just providing scholarships," Catherine explained during a community meeting. "We're creating a support system that understands the challenges of balancing work, education, and life responsibilities." The program would include mentorship, flexible scheduling assistance, and childcare support, elements often overlooked in traditional educational aid programs. Thompson himself was undergoing a profound transformation. The man who once couldn't be bothered to look service workers in the eye was now regularly sitting down with employees from all levels of his company, listening more than speaking. His wife noticed him bringing work home less and spending more time reflecting on the letters and emails he received from people sharing their stories of workplace discrimination and resilience. One evening, as Thompson sat in his study reading another letter, he came across one that stopped him in his tracks. It was from the daughter of his first boss, when he was a teenage busboy at a local diner. She reminded him of how her father had given him extra shifts so he could save for college, how he'd been treated with respect despite his inexperience. Thompson sat back, memories flooding in of his own humble beginnings, memories he'd carefully buried beneath decades of acquired arrogance. The media narrative was shifting too. Chen Wei's follow-up articles now focused on the ripple effects of the initial incident. Other companies were preemptively reviewing their corporate cultures, and a national conversation about workplace dignity was gaining momentum. The hashtag Justice for Joy had evolved into hashtag Dignity at Work, spawning a movement larger than any individual or company. Joy's nursing program became a model for others. Dr. Reeves worked with other medical schools to create similar opportunities for working students, and several major hospitals revised their hiring practices to actively recruit staff with service industry experience, recognizing the unique interpersonal skills they brought to healthcare. Mrs. Rose Henderson's shareholder coalition grew into a formal advisory board, ensuring that the company's transformation wouldn't be just a temporary response to public pressure. Their first major initiative was a comprehensive review of wage equity across all levels of the organization, resulting in significant adjustments that set new standards for the industry. Robert Washington, seeing genuine change in his former partner, agreed to return to the company in an advisory role. His first project was designing a management training program that emphasized emotional intelligence and cultural awareness alongside traditional business skills. The cafe itself was thriving, becoming a symbol of workplace dignity. Mrs. Lin had installed a small plaque that read, "Every person who walks through these doors deserves respect." It became common to see executives and service workers sitting together, sharing stories and ideas for continuing the momentum of change. As autumn turned to winter, Joy received an unexpected package at the hospital where she was doing her clinicals. Inside was a handwritten note from Thompson, "Your dignity showed me my own lack of it. Thank you for helping me remember who I used to be, and showing me who I could still become." Accompanying the note was a journal from his busboy days, filled with young Thompson's dreams of making a difference in the world. The story could have ended there, with neat resolutions and lessons learned. But real change isn't about endings, it's about continuing commitments to do better, to be better. Thompson Enterprises' transformation became a case study in corporate responsibility, not because it was perfect, but because it was genuine, messy, and ongoing. The true measure of change came 6 months later, when Joy, now halfway through her nursing program, returned to the cafe for a coffee. She was served by a new waitress, and as she watched Thompson, there for his regular morning meeting with employees, treat the server with genuine respect and interest, she realized that sometimes the biggest transformations start with the smallest moments of human dignity. 1 year after the incident that changed everything, the Blue Harbor Cafe hosted a unique gathering. The small establishment had been transformed for the evening, its usual coffee bar setup replaced by round tables where people from all walks of life sat together, corporate executives alongside service workers, medical professionals next to students, all united by a shared commitment to workplace dignity. The occasion was the launch of the Workplace Dignity Initiative, a nationwide program born from the unexpected partnership between Joy Williams and the Thompson Foundation. But the real celebration was about more than just another corporate program. It was about the stories of transformation that filled the room. At one table sat Mrs. Lin, the cafe owner, sharing her vision for turning service industry jobs into stepping stones rather than dead ends. "Every person who works here now has a personal development plan," she explained to an attentive group of business owners. "We don't just hire employees, we invest in futures." Joy, now in her final semester of nursing school, moved between tables in her clinical scrubs, having come straight from her hospital rotation. Her presence drew attention not for the viral video from a year ago, but for the quiet authority she developed as a healthcare professional in training. The evening's most powerful moment came when Thompson rose to speak. Gone was the commanding, intimidating figure of old. In his place stood a man humbled by experience but energized by purpose. "A year ago, I thought I had everything figured out," he began, his voice carrying traces of emotion. "I measured success in dollars and deals. But true success isn't about what you accumulate, it's about what you give back." He shared how the past year had reshaped not just his company but his understanding of leadership. Thompson Enterprises had undergone a complete cultural transformation, with results that defied conventional business wisdom. Employee satisfaction had soared, productivity had increased, and surprisingly, so had profitability. "When people feel valued," Thompson explained, "they bring their whole selves to work. Innovation comes from feeling safe enough to take risks, to speak up, to challenge the status quo." He gestured to his daughter Catherine, who was deep in conversation with a group of young entrepreneurs. "My own daughter had to become my teacher, showing me what real leadership looks like." The impact extended far beyond one company. Chen Wei, whose reporting had helped catalyst the change, presented findings from a nationwide study of workplace culture. "What started here has sparked a movement," he reported. "Companies across the country are re-examining their practices, not just because it's right, but because it works." Mrs. Rose Henderson, now heading the Shareholder Advisory Board, shared how the company's transformation had influenced other corporations. "We're seeing a domino effect," she noted. "When one of the biggest players changes the game, others follow suit." But perhaps the most significant changes were the personal ones. Robert Washington spoke about his renewed friendship with Thompson, describing how their late-night conversations about the company's early ideals had evolved into practical plans for sustainable change. "Sometimes you need to lose your way to find a better path," he reflected. The evening took an unexpected turn when a young waitress currently working at the cafe stood up to share her story. "6 months ago, I was ready to give up on my dreams," she said. "But thanks to the program Mrs. Lin and the foundation set up, I'm now taking pre-med courses. More importantly, I'm being treated with respect while I work toward my goals." Joy watched from the back of the room as more people began sharing their stories: a security guard pursuing a degree in computer science, a janitor studying to become a teacher, a delivery driver learning business management. Each story reflected the ripple effects of that one confrontation a year ago. As the evening drew to a close, Dr. Patricia Reeves from Wellington Medical School announced a new partnership with the Thompson Foundation. "We're expanding our program to 10 other medical schools," she revealed. Joy's journey showed us that some of our best healthcare professionals come from service backgrounds. They bring empathy and resilience that can't be taught in classrooms. Thompson's wife, watching her husband engage warmly with every person who approached him, reflected on the changes she'd witnessed. "A year ago, he wouldn't have been caught dead serving coffee," she confided to Catherine. "Now look at him." Indeed, Thompson had stepped behind the counter to help Mrs. Lin serve guests, handling each cup with care and respect. The transformation hadn't been without its challenges. Some old guard executives had resigned, uncomfortable with the new direction. Shareholders had initially questioned the substantial investment in employee development programs. But the results were undeniable, not just in metrics and numbers, but in the human stories that filled the room. As the gathering wound down, Joy found herself back at the table where everything had started. Thompson joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee he'd made himself. "I've been practicing," he said with a self-deprecating smile, setting the cups down carefully. "Though I'm told I still have a lot to learn about foam art." Their conversation turned to the future. Joy shared her plans to work in community healthcare, focusing on underserved neighborhoods. Thompson listened intently, occasionally jotting notes about potential foundation support for such initiatives. "You know," Joy reflected, "when people ask me if I'm angry about what happened that day, I tell them I'm grateful." She paused, choosing her words carefully. Not for the humiliation, but for the change it sparked. Sometimes it takes a moment of darkness to show us where we need to bring light. The evening ended with Mrs. Lin hanging a new sign in the cafe window: "Every cup of coffee comes with a side of dignity." It was more than just a slogan, it was a testament to how a single moment of confrontation had evolved into a movement of transformation, 1 cup of coffee at a time. 18 months after the incident, Joy stood before a graduating class of nursing students at Wellington Medical School, her own graduation cap sitting proudly on her head. As the chosen student speaker, she looked out at the sea of faces, among them, several former service workers who had followed in her footsteps through the Thompson Foundation Scholarship Program. "Healthcare isn't just about medical knowledge," she began, her voice steady and confident. "It's about understanding human dignity in its most vulnerable moments. Many of us learn that lesson not in classrooms, but while serving coffee, waiting tables, or cleaning floors." The audience, including Thompson and his family seated in the front row, listened intently. The graduation ceremony marked more than just academic achievement, it represented a fundamental shift in how society viewed essential workers. The Thompson Foundation's initiative had expanded beyond its original scope, now partnering with 50 universities across the country to create opportunities for service industry workers pursuing higher education. But the real story of change was playing out in unexpected ways. Thompson Enterprises had become a case study in corporate transformation, with business schools analyzing how a public relations crisis had evolved into a genuine revolution in workplace culture. The company's stock price, after an initial dip, had reached new heights, proving that ethical business practices could coexist with profitability. Catherine Thompson, now fully embracing her role as the foundation's director, had initiated a documentary project capturing the stories of workers whose lives had been touched by the program. The film crew spent a day following Mrs. Lin at the Blue Harbor Cafe, where she had implemented a revolutionary management model. "Every employee here is considered a future professional in training," Mrs. Lin explained to the documentary team. "We adjust schedules around classes, provide mentorship, and celebrate each step toward their dreams." The cafe had become a blueprint for other businesses, proving that investing in employees' futures created loyalty no amount of money could buy. Thompson himself had undergone perhaps the most remarkable transformation. The man who once viewed service workers as beneath his notice now taught a guest lecture series at the local community college, sharing lessons about humility, leadership, and the true meaning of success. His favorite classroom exercise involved having business students work service industry jobs for a week, then reflect on their experiences. "You can't lead people you don't understand," he would tell his students. "And you can't understand people whose shoes you've never walked in." The irony of these words coming from a former symbol of corporate arrogance wasn't lost on anyone, but it made the message all the more powerful. Robert Washington, watching his old friend's evolution, had spearheaded a new initiative within Thompson Enterprises, the Employee Future Fund. The program not only provided educational opportunities but also offered seed funding for workers who wanted to start their own businesses. "We're not just helping people climb the corporate ladder," he explained. "We're helping them build their own ladders." Mrs. Rose Henderson's shareholder coalition had grown into a powerful force for corporate accountability nationwide. Their annual report card on workplace dignity had become a crucial metric for investors, forcing companies to take employee well-being seriously. "Change happens when we hit them in the portfolio," she would say with a knowing smile. The Blue Harbor Cafe had sprouted siblings across the city, not franchises, but independent cafes adopting similar principles of worker empowerment. Mrs. Lin had created an informal network of business owners committed to supporting their employees' dreams, sharing resources and best practices. Chen Wei's reporting had earned him a Pulitzer nomination, but he considered his greatest achievement to be the ongoing series of stories tracking the ripple effects of workplace transformation. This isn't just about one company or one incident anymore, he noted in his latest article. It's about reimagining the relationship between employers and employees. Joy's graduation day was particularly meaningful for Thompson's wife, who had quietly been one of the foundation's most active volunteers. She had started a mentorship program pairing corporate executive spouses with scholarship recipients, breaking down social barriers that had once seemed insurmountable. After the graduation ceremony, an impromptu gathering formed at the Blue Harbor Cafe. The small space was packed with an unlikely mix: graduating nurses still in their caps and gowns, corporate executives, service workers, and community members. Mrs. Lin had prepared special graduation-themed lattes, complete with mini diploma designs in the foam. As Joy moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and sharing hugs, she found herself face to face with a young waitress who had recently started at the cafe. The girl's eyes shone with hope as she shared her own dreams of becoming a pediatrician. "Your story showed me it was possible," she told Joy. Thompson, observing this interaction from across the room, felt a familiar tightness in his throat. He remembered the man he had been, so consumed by power and pride that he had forgotten his own humanity. The memory of that morning still brought him shame, but it was now tempered by gratitude for the wake-up call it had provided. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, Joy and Catherine sat at the cafe's counter, sharing a quiet moment. "You know what's funny?" Joy mused, running her finger along the rim of her coffee cup. "That morning, I thought my life was falling apart. Instead, it was falling into place." The Thompson Foundation was preparing to launch its next phase, a nationwide network of resource centers providing education, mentorship, and support services to service industry workers. The centers would be named the Joy Williams Initiative, despite Joy's initial protests about using her name. "It's not about you anymore," Catherine had explained. "It's about what you represent, the dignity that exists in every person, regardless of their job title or bank balance." Joy had finally agreed, on the condition that the centers would prioritize practical support over recognition. As the sun set on graduation day, casting long shadows through the cafe windows, Thompson gathered everyone's attention for an announcement. The foundation was establishing a new medical scholarship specifically for service workers interested in healthcare, inspired by Joy's journey. "But this time," he said, looking directly at Joy, "we're naming it after the person who truly started all of this, Mrs. Lin. Because while my actions may have sparked a crisis, it was her quiet dignity in running this cafe that created the foundation for real change." Mrs. Lin, usually composed, wiped tears from her eyes as the room erupted in applause. She had never sought recognition, but her commitment to treating every employee with respect had helped create a model for workplace transformation that was now spreading across the country. The day ended as it had begun, with hope, unity, and the understanding that true change happens not in grand gestures, but in daily acts of respect and dignity. As the last guests departed, Joy lingered for a moment, looking at her reflection in the cafe window. She saw not just a newly graduated nurse, but a symbol of what was possible when people dared to stand up for their dignity, and when others had the courage to acknowledge their mistakes and work toward genuine change. 2 years had passed since that fateful morning at Blue Harbor Cafe, and the ripples of change had become waves of transformation. On a bright spring morning, Joy Williams stood in the emergency room of City General Hospital, now a full-fledged nurse, treating a patient who looked strikingly familiar. It was the daughter of a CEO who had once been notorious for mistreating service workers. "My father changed his entire company's culture after hearing about your story," the young woman whispered as Joy checked her vitals. "He said it made him realize he was teaching me the wrong lessons about success." The moment crystallized everything the movement had achieved. Change wasn't just institutional, it was generational. Across town, Thompson Enterprises had become unrecognizable from its former self. The corporate headquarters, once an intimidating fortress of glass and steel, had been redesigned to include a community education center on the ground floor. Current and former service workers could access resources, attend classes, and receive mentorship, all while surrounded by art that celebrated the dignity of work. Thompson himself had undergone the most profound transformation. The man who once couldn't be bothered to look servers in the eye now spent every Friday morning working alongside the cafe staff at various locations throughout the city. "You never really understand a job until you do it yourself," he would say, his humility no longer an act but a genuine reflection of his changed perspective. Catherine Thompson's leadership of the foundation had expanded its reach in unexpected ways. She had initiated a partnership with major tech companies to develop free educational apps specifically designed for working students. The apps help users balance work schedules with study time, connect with mentors, and access emergency resources when needed. "Technology should bridge gaps, not create them," Catherine explained during a TED Talk that went viral. "We're using AI to identify barriers to education and employment, then developing practical solutions to overcome them." The Foundation's tech initiative had already helped thousands of working students better manage their demanding schedules. Mrs. Lin's cafe management model had been documented in a Harvard Business Review case study, leading to invitations from business schools worldwide. She remained humble, focusing on her true passion, helping her employees achieve their dreams. The cafe wall now displayed dozens of photographs of former employees in their new careers: doctors, teachers, engineers, and entrepreneurs. One morning, as Mrs. Lin trained a new barista, a familiar face appeared at the counter, Robert Washington, carrying a thick folder of business plans. The Employee Future Fund had become so successful that they were opening a dedicated office in the cafe's building, offering microloans and business guidance to service workers with entrepreneurial dreams. "Remember when we thought this was just about coffee?" Mrs. Lin mused, sharing a quiet moment with Washington. "Now we're witnessing an entire generation redefining what it means to serve and be served." The impact extended far beyond American shores. International business publications had picked up the story, leading to similar initiatives in countries around the world. Joy occasionally received messages from workers in Europe, Asia, and Africa, sharing how her story had inspired them to stand up for their dignity while pursuing their dreams. Mrs. Rose Henderson's shareholder coalition had evolved into a powerful nonprofit organization, the Workplace Dignity Institute. They developed corporate accountability metrics that were now being adopted by major investment firms. "We've proven that treating workers with dignity isn't just morally right, it's good business," she declared at their annual conference. Chen Wei's reporting had expanded into a book project, documenting how a single incident of workplace humiliation had catalyzed a national movement. "The most remarkable aspect," he wrote, "isn't the programs or policies, it's the fundamental shift in how we view the relationship between work and human dignity." The Blue Harbor Cafe had become something of a pilgrim site for business leaders seeking to understand genuine corporate transformation. Mrs. Lin welcomed them all but always emphasized the same point: the secret isn't in our coffee or our programs, it's in recognizing the humanity in every person who walks through that door. Joy's nursing career had taken an unexpected turn when she was asked to develop a training program for healthcare workers transitioning from service industries. Her curriculum emphasized how skills learned in customer service, patience, empathy, grace under pressure, translated perfectly to patient care. "The best healthcare providers understand that every patient deserves to be treated with dignity," Joy explained to a new class of nursing students, many of whom had come through the Thompson Foundation's program. "Sometimes the hardest lessons about compassion are learned while wearing an apron, not a stethoscope." Thompson's wife had found her own calling, working with universities to create more flexible degree programs for working students. Education shouldn't be a privilege reserved for those who can afford to stop working, she argued in a presentation to college administrators. We need to adapt our institutions to serve all students, not expect all students to fit our traditional mold. The Foundation's latest initiative was perhaps its most ambitious yet, a nationwide network of dignity centers that combined education resources, career counseling, childcare services, and business incubation spaces. The first center, opening in the renovated building next to the original Blue Harbor Cafe, would serve as a model for others across the country. During the center's opening ceremony, Thompson surprised everyone by announcing his retirement as CEO of Thompson Enterprises. Leadership isn't about holding on to power, he declared. It's about knowing when to step aside and let new voices lead. He introduced his successor, a former service worker who had worked her way up through the company while earning her MBA through the Foundation's program. As Joy watched the ceremony from the back of the room, she felt a tap on her shoulder. It was her sister, who had just completed her own journey through medical school. "Remember when you thought that morning was the worst thing that could have happened?" her sister whispered. "Look at all the good that came from it." The day ended with an informal gathering at the cafe, where Mrs. Lin had prepared a special blend of coffee she called Dignity Roast. As cups were passed around, stories were shared of lives transformed, dreams achieved, and barriers broken. The conversation turned to the future, not just of the Foundation or the movement, but of a society that was slowly learning to value every person's contribution. Thompson, now more comfortable behind a coffee counter than a corporate desk, served drinks alongside Mrs. Lin. Each cup was a reminder of how far he'd come from that morning 2 years ago, and how a moment of shame had led to a lifetime of purpose. As the sun set on another day at Blue Harbor Cafe, Joy took a moment to reflect on the journey. The incident that had once threatened to break her spirit had instead broken down walls between people, between classes, between dreams and reality. The price of pride had been high, but the rewards of humility and human dignity had proved immeasurable. 3 years after the incident that changed countless lives, the Blue Harbor Cafe hosted a very special reunion. The occasion was the 3rd anniversary of the Workplace Dignity Initiative, but it was also a celebration of something more profound, the power of transformation and the enduring strength of human dignity. The cafe had been transformed for the evening, with strings of warm lights creating a gentle glow. Photos and newspaper clippings covered one wall, telling the story of how a single moment of confrontation had sparked a nationwide movement. At the center was the viral photo from that fateful morning, now framed alongside images of the thousands of lives changed through the programs it had inspired. Joy, now a respected nurse practitioner and board member of the Thompson Foundation, arrived early to help Mrs. Lin with the preparations. As they arranged flowers on the tables, they reflected on how their lives had intertwined with so many others over the past 3 years. "Sometimes I still can't believe how much has changed," Mrs. Lin said, adjusting a centerpiece. "Did you know we've helped over 200 of our employees pursue their education? And that's just from this one cafe." The evening began with an unexpected announcement. Chen Wei, whose reporting had helped catalyze the movement, revealed that the Blue Harbor Cafe model had been adopted by over 5,000 businesses nationwide. "What started as one woman's stand for dignity," he reported, "has revolutionized how we think about service work and education." Thompson arrived without fanfare, carrying a tray of coffee he'd made himself, a skill he'd finally mastered after 3 years of practice. Since stepping down as CEO, he'd found a new purpose in mentoring young entrepreneurs from service industry backgrounds. His corporate titan persona was long gone, replaced by something more genuine, a man who had learned that true legacy isn't measured in dollars but in lives touched. The biggest lesson, he shared with the gathered crowd, wasn't about business at all. It was about remembering our shared humanity. Every person who walks through these doors, through any doors, carries dreams just as valid as our own. Catherine Thompson presented the Foundation's latest impact report. The numbers were staggering: over 50,000 scholarships awarded, 300 dignity centers established nationwide, and a 90% program completion rate. But the real success stories were the people in the room, former service workers who had become doctors, lawyers, teachers, and business owners. Mrs. Rose Henderson, now in her mid-80s but still sharp as ever, announced her retirement from the Workplace Dignity Institute's board. Her replacement would be a former barista who had worked her way through law school. "The torch passes to those who will carry it further," she said, her voice strong with emotion. Robert Washington shared news about the Employee Future Fund's latest initiative, a partnership with major banks to provide low-interest business loans to service workers starting their own ventures. "We're not just changing individual lives anymore," he explained. "We're changing the very fabric of entrepreneurship in America." The evening's most touching moment came when a group of current Blue Harbor employees presented Joy with a handmade book of letters from people she'd never met, service workers around the world who had been inspired by her story to stand up for their dignity while pursuing their dreams. "Your courage that morning," one letter read, "taught me that dignity isn't something others give us, it's something we already possess. We just need the strength to claim it." Thompson's wife, who had been instrumental in expanding educational access programs, announced a new partnership with online universities to create flexible degree programs specifically designed for working students. "Education shouldn't require choosing between learning and earning," she declared to enthusiastic applause. As the evening progressed, Mrs. Lynn gathered everyone for a special ceremony. The cafe's original sign was being retired to a museum of social change, replaced by a new one that read, "Blue Harbor Cafe, where every cup serves dignity." The old sign would be displayed alongside other artifacts from movements that had transformed American society. Joy found herself standing next to Thompson at the coffee bar, both of them watching the diverse crowd of people whose lives had become unexpectedly intertwined. "Did you ever imagine," she asked him, "that spilled coffee could create such ripples?" Thompson shook his head, a mixture of humility and wonder in his eyes. "I was so blind back then," he reflected. "I thought power came from making people feel small. Now I understand, true power lies in helping others recognize their own greatness." The Foundation's next chapter was unveiled, a global initiative to support service workers' education and entrepreneurship in developing countries. The program would partner with local organizations to adapt the Blue Harbor model to different cultural contexts while maintaining its core principle: every person's dignity is innate and deserving of respect. As the evening drew to a close, Chen Wei premiered a short documentary featuring interviews with people whose lives had been touched by the movement. The film ended with a simple question: what happens when we recognize the dignity in every cup of coffee, every service interaction, every human encounter? The answer filled the room in the stories being shared, the dreams being realized, and the barriers being broken. What had begun as a moment of humiliation had transformed into a movement of empowerment, proving that sometimes the greatest changes come from the most unexpected beginnings. Joy's final words to the gathering captured the essence of their shared journey. 3 years ago, I thought I was fighting for my own dignity. Now I understand, dignity isn't something we fight for alone. It's something we nurture in each other, one interaction at a time, one dream at a time, one cup of coffee at a time. As the guests departed, Mrs. Lynn turned the cafe's lights down but left the new sign illuminated. Its warm glow spilled onto the sidewalk, a beacon of hope and reminder that every workplace could be a place of dignity, every job a stepping stone to dreams, and every person worthy of respect. The story of the Blue Harbor Cafe didn't end there. It lived on in every person who walked through its doors, in every dream pursued, in every act of kindness and respect. What had started with spilled coffee had become an unstoppable wave of change, proving that sometimes the price of pride is worth paying if it leads to the priceless reward of transformed lives and restored dignity.